Welcome back to the council, everybody. This afternoon we have two public hearings. The first public hearing is on supplemental appropriation 2411 to the county government's FY24 capital budget and amendment to the FY23 to 28 capital improvements program, otherwise known as the CIP. Montgomery County Government Department of General Services, Energy Conservation, number P507834, in the amount of $861,844. The source of funds are utility incentives. Council action is scheduled for November 28th, and those wishing to submit material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business on November 21st. There are no public speakers for this hearing, so this public hearing is now closed. Item number 6 is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation 2412 to the county government's FY24 capital budget and amendment to the FY23 to 28 capital improvements program for Montgomery County Government, the Department of General Services, Exelon Pepco Merger Fund, in the amount of $504,662, and the source of funds are utility incentives. Council action is scheduled for November 28th. Those wishing to submit material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business on November 21st. There are no speakers for this public hearing, and this public hearing is now closed. And so, colleagues, the final item of the day is a continuation of the conversation from last week regarding state legislative priorities and a review of the local legislation that has been submitted by our state delegation. Yesterday, they did have their state priorities listening session. The county executive and I participated and shared support for various capital improvement projects that we're hoping the state will fund, but we did not get into any policy or legislative priorities because we're going to start talking about that now, and we'll continue talking about that for the weeks ahead. So I will welcome Ms. Wenger and her team to the table to kick us off on the state legislative priorities letter, and colleagues should have that letter. And I'll start by saying there is always a great debate of how long this letter should be. And the feedback many of us have received is short and concise is better. You know, the fewer pages a delegate or senator have to carry as they're walking the corridors of power in Annapolis would better serve us, but that is a conversation that's about to unfold. Ms. Wenger.
That's right. Thank you. Good afternoon. You got kind of three attachments to your packet. I'll just tell you briefly what they are. The first is a revised priorities document that we showed to you several weeks ago that was just the county executive's recommendations for the document. We listened, there was a robust discussion, and we took all of that back. The staff and I made changes to reflect the suggestions that were made here in our last meeting. Hopefully we have them accurate, and those suggestions are in italics. So that's the first attachment. The second attachment is a summary of all the local bills that have been submitted by our state delegation members, and then the last attachment is something that we will just continually update throughout the session, and that's just a chart, just a summary chart that will try and keep you abreast of where all of this stands as far as the local bills. So you'll see that probably every time we meet until the session ends, which will be in April. But we can start with the priorities. I did send this revised document out to you. I got some feedback. How would you like to proceed?
Let's take it, well, I think for the time that we're under, I think we're trying to do two things this afternoon. One is settle on the priorities letter, and I'll invite my colleagues to enter into the queue if they have any changes or thoughts about the letter, which is currently 3 pages. And then after we agree upon the letter, then we can start talking about some of the actual legislation
Sounds good.
that has been introduced.
Sure.
Or is planning on being introduced.
Sure.
That's fair?
Sure.
Okay. We'll start off with Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I know that there's pressure to make the letter shorter. I'm going to propose to make it longer, but just for 1 second. So the issue of cold storage and food aggregation around the state came up in our recent Economic Development Committee meeting on agritourism. So when we spoke about this the last time we met, it hadn't come up. So it came up recently. We had a really good conversation about Montgomery County agritourism, and we had the government relations director from Maryland Department of Ag, Rachel Jones, and we just basically asked her from the state perspective what were her needs in terms of helping the farming community. And it really dovetailed with what we're trying to do here in the county, and that's to, I'd suggest, support initiatives to strengthen local food resiliency efforts, including financial support for cold storage and food aggregation capacity building. And that's something that we're looking at in Montgomery County, but the State Department of Agriculture is looking at that statewide and to look at funding for these aggregation centers. And I would like to propose to my colleagues that we add something to that effect.
Do you have any language or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. Without objection? And the length was at the will of the body, and I know where the will of the body is going. I just wanted to state it from the onset. Okay, so we'll adopt
Yes, we can
that?
follow up on exact language, and we'll work with you on that.
Okay, Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm supportive of this. I think this should be a one-page document. It's clearly not going to be a one-page document. I absolutely don't think it should be more than a 2-page document, a front and back document. So my suggestion is that we include this, but we take something else out. And my suggestion here would be to expand the climate change and environment to be climate, environment, and food resiliency, which are related issues. And in the last bullet, which I mean honestly means almost nothing, support opportunities to collaborate with partners to develop and test innovative solutions to shared challenges, cut that and add this. Because this is an example of doing that actually says something and does something. So can I, as a friendly amendment, just suggest that we change that to climate, environment, and food resiliency as the title, and then scrap the 3rd bullet and replace it with this bullet?
Very good. Well, picking up on the climate and the environment section and the points that you were raising, and I echo the sentiment of brevity, right? But we will do what we do. I would like to add for my colleagues' consideration in that first bullet point, support bold and equitable clean energy, building decarbonization. I would like to add solar development, and then transportation, and to this point, add food waste reduction policies, which are all integral to reducing our waste stream and increasing our resiliency, energy production. And then the second bullet point, support improvements in recycling requirements, extended producer responsibility, flood mitigation, environmental protection, and renewable energy production. This second bullet point, just adding renewable energy production at the end of that second bullet point. And then the third point is something that the third bullet, we just strike? Okay. I was going to make a recommendation based on the conversation that the T&E committee had yesterday about electric vehicles, and where we need to go, but I'll reserve that out of respect for brevity. You want to be still in the queue?
Yeah, on this, I agree with your edits, but I think you can accomplish the same thing in the first bullet if we take out needed to achieve state and county net zero climate goals and protect our natural environment. I mean, to me, that's understood of why we're doing the first part. I would just cut that out just for the purpose of reducing this. That's understood why we're doing it, to meet our climate goals. It will make this a little shorter, so I just suggest that we do that. So adopt your
that.
change, but
Yep.
cut the end of the sentence so that we're not adding to the document. My goal here is
Sure.
to tighten it up a little bit and get it to 2 pages at
So-
most.
So appreciate that, and I think we can try and balance two different things. One, I think it's important for us all to be on the same page, or pages, should it be, with regard to this priorities letter. So if anyone has any policy changes they'd like to make, and then what I would suggest is that my office and Ms. Wanger's office, we can fine tune this, right, based on the input from the council, and we can do that copy editing then to try and streamline it without reducing policy goals, just reducing verbiage. Okay. Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. I wanted to go to the public safety section, if we may. I'm looking at the third bullet point there, support efforts to enhance penalties for distribution of fentanyl when an overdose results in serious injury or death, et cetera. So certainly we're all aligned on the goal to do something about the fentanyl crisis and the overdose crisis. We were just talking, of course, with our friends at MACO about the need for investment and support where it comes to mental health and overdose issues. This particular angle, we talked about a little bit the last time that we were looking at these priorities, and I thought that our chair of the Public Safety Committee made a really good point in regards to this in this discussion, noting that we use the low-level dealer to get to the next guy, and the next guy is who we need, right? So he noted, and I thought that was a great point. We have to make the arrest so that we can get to the next guy, and we have to get them help. This piece of legislation, though, that we're talking about here is one that would increase penalties. It does target those people on the lowest level of the drug distribution chain, who we want to use to get to the next guy. But those folks on the low level, the people who would also likely also use and would benefit from public health interventions as opposed to incarcerations. We have seen over time in the war on drugs that penalty increases, by and large, the data shows that they are very high cost and low return. And so something like this would really go against the trends that we have seen toward reversing the war on drugs, which we learned a lot from. So I would not love to say that we are supporting enhanced penalties here. This is certainly an issue that is really important to us, but I don't think that this is a solution. We want to make sure that we are able to use that low-level dealer, again, to get to the next guy, but that's not what this particular initiative, in my view, would do. So putting that up for conversation.
Okay. Are you recommending
To cut it.
the enhanced penalties?
To cut the enhanced penalties. If we wanted to replace it with something else that was in line with our goals to address the opioid crisis, I think that would be worth talking about, because that's obviously a very high priority for all of us. But I don't think that this particular measure is something that is going to help us there.
Well, I'll add that what's missing from that section is support and recovery efforts, right?
That's exactly right.
Right, okay. Okay. Any objection? Oh, okay, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I believe that we need to figure out what the enhanced penalties would be. But if you don't have enhanced penalties, then we're not going to have that low-level person realize that it's in their own best interest to help figure out where the next level goes up. And so I think that certainly we need to get that person help, but we also need to have a penalty, and if it's enhanced penalties, this is for the words distribution of fentanyl. This isn't about a user, this is about distribution. And so I think we do need to have enhanced penalties for the distribution, and I believe this allows for the prosecutor or whatever to make a deal to say, okay, if you tell us where you got this, we can help out here. But I don't think we're helping our situation by pretending that we're gonna solve this the way we've solved it in the past. It's just not working. And fentanyl is truly someone that is using fentanyl is truly looking to either is going to murder somebody. I mean, there's no other way to say it. So anyhow, I believe we should keep it. I believe we could add to it and say that and increase help for people who are in this situation. But I think we need to keep it.
So thank you, Councilmember Katz. I think it's fair to say we all recognize we need to deal with the fentanyl crisis. And so however this sentence best reflects the crisis that exists and the need to do better. But Ms. Wenger, I'll ask you and your team, we're talking about the enhanced penalties, but later on it says enhanced prosecutorial authority. Is there not enough authority granted our state's attorneys and others? I don't know who to.
I think that this goes back to our discussion about state legislation that the county executive had recommended. And this was a couple of pieces of legislation that was recommended by the police department that the county executive supported, and that's where this whole discussion came from. I want to just say one thing about the health aspects of this. There is a piece that references fentanyl treatment or behavioral health and treatment under the health section. But they are bifurcated pieces. So again, this was a discussion that took place about wanting to increase the penalties to mirror the federal penalties, and then to also be able to try a case in one subdivision instead of having the cases split between two subdivisions when it was, when the issue occurred over two subdivisions. That's where this came from, and I do recall the discussion that ensued when that was discussed. So this is how we parsed it. It may not meet the needs. So.
And thank you for reframing the conversation that this is the letter the county executive has approved, and so we are editing it, amending it, changing it, so that we have a consensus. Correct?
Right. This is new. This is in italics, so I believe this is new language, but I do believe it reflects an earlier conversation. So we can fix this if there's consensus about it.
No. I understand. I understand that. The point I'm making, trying to make at least, is that the county executive approved of that language and the goal. That's
He did
all.
support
That's what I'm just trying to state for the record.
legislation.
There's a lot of people in the queue. Don't want to really get bogged down on this one point. I absolutely understand the importance of it, but let's just be mindful. Councilmember Jawanda.
Well, I appreciate that. I do think it's an important point, though. So, if we're trying to say what we support, we should talk about it. I also would agree that while we all want to do something, because the increase in fentanyl use is with our young people, right? The primary increase, and it's pouring across the borders. It's a huge issue. The large-scale suppliers, the people who are, that's what we need to stop. And so for me, the details around distribution, which can vary, what that would be considered. I don't think there's a bill. Is there a pre-filed bill that speaks to this already?
There is not.
Right. So we don't. So I would want to take up any sort of effort in our regular state legislative process, and potentially look at it and decide it that way. I worry about efforts to enhance penalties for distribution when an overdose results, I've seen distribution cases for very small, what I think most of us would consider small amounts. Now, again, we don't want anyone using the drugs. So I would be in favor of it if we're talking about, sufficient levels, and that's what I would want to see a little more specificity personally. I agree generally with Councilmember Mink that we have seen over time that enhanced penalties have not, the first page of the Drug Czar's report 10 years ago was that drugs are widely and openly available in the United States, right? The penalties have made no difference in the war on drugs. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to crack down on people who are coming into our community with the intent to distribute it, especially at big levels. So I also agree that we should add here, even though it's in the health section, we should also add anywhere we talk about this, we want to be consistent and talk about supporting efforts for treatment for substance use as well. So I think I heard some agreement there. So I would want to hold off on this until we had more information, but at a minimum, put in the language around substance use and treatment.
Okay. Councilmember Lutke.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate everyone's comments, and I certainly appreciate and support the language that's in the Health and Human Services section up above related to diversion and treatment. And perhaps here in this section, because we are specifically talking about public safety, we have a bullet that talks about supporting efforts for increasing diversionary systems. Right? Because that encompasses treatment and encompasses other things. But back to the enhanced penalty piece. And pharmacologically, when you're talking about fentanyl, there's no such thing as a big amount versus a small amount, because a speck can kill someone. Depends on what it's mixed with, depends on how it's absorbed into your bloodstream. Right? So unlike certain other drugs where we do have threshold amounts that are considered for distribution that vary in type based on, again, their pharmacological effects, fentanyl is entirely something different. And by enhancing the penalties for distribution, whether they're a little fish in a little pond or a little fish in a big pond, they are one step in the chain toward getting to the bigger fish. And it's that leverage that is necessary in order to enforce their cooperation. We have situations happening here in this county where we've had shootings over the past couple months, where they are drug-related shootings and it's drug distribution-related shootings, and the victims of the shootings won't talk and won't give up a name. And they have just been shot, and they are on their way to the hospital, but they still won't talk. So I don't know what it's going to take to get people to talk, but I certainly don't want to leave anything on the table, because this is an absolute all-out public health crisis. So I think that we can certainly support diversionary practices while also still supporting this and making sure that we tighten up the loop on prosecutorial authority for dual jurisdiction incidents, so that we don't have hiccups where the drug was purchased in one county and then consumed next door right at a county line. We have a lot of that happens, and this will streamline the ability to deal with those cases. So thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to colleagues. I appreciate everything that's been said here. I tend to agree with both, actually. So my first view is, I agree with the language that's here. I do think we need stricter penalties, because I think we have to go after the people who are distributing if we're going to actually address this problem, to protect the people who are using and get them the support and the help that they need. Having said that, I think we've taken a departure from what this original document was intended to be. And I will support any bill that does exactly what this statement says, and I am prepared to do that. My personal view is we already have too many things on this document. I think this document, from my perspective, there's so much overwhelming consensus here on so many different issues that we should be advocating for, that there should be unanimous agreement between this body and the executive branch. We could fill 3 pages of stuff. And I think we should reduce those 3 pages to 1 page personally, but at most 2 pages. So my suggestion here in this particular case, and moving forward as we have this discussion, if there isn't unanimous agreement, if there's any level of discomfort with a policy goal, let's just take it off. It will help us to reduce the document, and it will allow us to take it up when individual bills come up. I think it is a stronger statement for us to be able to say that everything on this list is unanimously supported by Montgomery County's elected leadership. It will allow us to speak with one voice with our delegation. And then we will go, as we always do, majority rules on each and every bill. We can debate on the various fine points of those bills. And if there's anybody who's in disagreement, you can send your own letter on your own letterhead, speaking only for yourself, or any other colleagues who wish to join you with a difference of opinion. So that would be my suggestion here, and it's going to be my suggestion as we move forward. I think there are a couple items where there may not be unanimous agreement, and I just would humbly suggest to take those off.
I appreciate Vice President Friedson's recommendation. I agree with it. I know there are a number of people in the queue. I'm going to make the suggestion that we just strike that third bullet point. Is there agreement on that? Seeing without objection, we're just going to strike that third bullet point. Okay. Well,
I believe that we, I'm sorry, are you next in the queue? Well, go ahead.
Councilmember Albernos.
Yeah, so this is my 5th state legislative process and session, and we always spend so much time talking about these issues, and in the grand scheme of things, we have influence, obviously, but I'm always not impressed how much influence we actually, in fact, have. And we spend more time talking about issues, but it's good we're talking about them, right? So I completely agree with the comments of Council Vice President Friedson, not just on this, but other issues that may come up that we may not find agreement on. And there are other mechanisms that we can utilize. Nobody is under the disillusion that this council does not think this is a crisis. We all agree it's a crisis. We've had multiple council sessions on it. Several of my colleagues have done an outstanding job hosting community forums. And so it should not be lost on anyone that we all know how critical this issue is, how important it is, and how it's all hands on deck, and we need to use every reasonable tool at our disposal to address it. I'm not an expert when it comes to the conversation we are having, and so I don't feel equipped to be able to formally weigh in on, criminology policy. But having said that, I do think that once this bill comes forward to us, we'll have an opportunity to debate and discuss it, as has been noted. And I think that's where we should spend our energy and time.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Sorry, I should have taken myself out of the queue. I just want to say I agree with the direction we're going in and thank Council Vice President Friedson for moving us there.
Very good. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I'm in disagreement. I think that the fact that we would not even mention the fentanyl crisis, and I agree that with this, that many times this letter is a lot of work when you get a very little return from it. But I believe the fact that we would not even mention a fentanyl crisis under public safety would be a true mistake.
It is listed, Councilmember Katz. It's in the Health and Human Services section on the 4th bullet.
I appreciate that. I believe it also should be mentioned somewhere under public safety.
Okay. Well, since unanimous consent didn't work, all those in favor of striking this bullet point? All those opposed? Okay, we'll strike that bullet point. Colleagues, any other points? Councilmember Jawanda.
I also, I agree with Councilman Friedson. I think Council Vice President Friedson, and I kind of said that, you said it more eloquently, that, let's take the bill up and the issue. I would have a similar set of concerns around the juvenile justice system bullet. And so I'd also like to remove that. There's certainly things that we can always do better. There were big changes made in the last year or so. And I'm not really sure what this means, number one, and as far as better balance concerns, but I'd rather take that important policy issue up as it comes before us if there are bills that come before the legislature on this topic, which I am not aware of, but there may be.
So which
It would
particular?
be bullet number 2. That I suggest under what we just did, I
Yep.
would suggest to strike.
Okay. Any objections to striking bullet number 2? Okay, objections? Councilmember Lutke? Or, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mink, did you want to speak? Well, we're going to strike and speak on this. Councilmember Lutke?
Here we go, right button. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando, for pointing out you weren't really quite sure what this was about, so let me explain. The state has been holding via the House Judiciary Committee a series of hearings on exactly this issue. It is something that's incredibly important, not just here in Montgomery County, but across the state. As certainly we have seen some hiccups and some challenges in getting things right, and in fact doing right by the kids who may be encountering the juvenile justice system and making sure that services are being provided to them in a timely fashion, not waiting till after disposition on a particular referral. So the Judiciary Committee held hearings on September 13th. I went to the one last week on November 8th, and there's one left to come on December 5th, at which point the legislature will be determining via the House Judiciary Committee what it will be doing in this arena. And I want to make sure that we are supportive of the efforts where we need clarification in this section of the law, that we are doing so and doing so in a way that balances whole community views and also, again, protecting youth from coercion. That is a concern that has arisen based on the Child Interrogation Protection Act, not because the act has things in it that aren't constitutionally sound. They're constitutional guarantees that all youth should have already have had and been afforded. But some older children who are above the cutoff threshold, who are 13 and older, and or young adults, are using children under the age of 13 who cannot be arrested to commit criminal acts, and that's a form of trafficking and coercion that's just unacceptable. And so that's what that is aimed at. So just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with Councilmember Lukey just said. I believe if you read what is written here, it says support efforts to improve the juvenile justice system to better balance concerns about community safety and protecting youth from coercion and repeat offending. And candidly, I think that absolutely is the correct thing to do. When this 12-year-old who was calling about bomb threats, and when they found out who he was, he said, well, you can't arrest me, I'm 12. So it's the system that we have, though well-intentioned in many ways, is not, it needs to be improved. We need to get that young person help. We don't need to do anything beyond that, but we need to get that young person help, and that they should understand that the laws affect them just as much as it affects everyone else.
Councilmember Fani Gonzalez.
I was okay with eliminating the third bullet under public safety because we talked about the issue under health, fine. On this one, I refuse to let it go. So I'm gonna back up Council Member Katz and Council Member Lutke on this one. And let's move on, please.
Councilmember Mink.
I have concerns about this bullet point as well, and I understand that we all have concerns about the juvenile justice system and wanting to ensure that our juveniles are getting the help that they need. I completely agree with that sentiment. My concern here is that that this can be right. There has been, to be very clear, there has been discussion about whether we need to roll back some of the reforms that were made at the state level previously, and those reforms were based on sound research and data. And I do not support rolling back those reforms. Happy to talk about it more, but certainly where I sit now, I do not support the rolling back of those reforms. That 12-year-old really concerned me too, because if a 12-year-old right now, if we have 12-year-olds in our community who believe that they are immune to consequences when they do something like call in bomb threats, they are wrong. they can be expelled from their school, amongst other serious consequences. We also have diversionary programs that are fully funded, staffed, and available to us right now that can be used for 12-year-olds on down to 5-year-olds, in fact, that can be used specifically to get them help and resources that we know for a fact are not being used right now. We know that our police are not making those referrals. We know that the Attorney General is not making those referrals. And DJS has said that they're going to do a better job of making those referrals as well. But what we know is that even without entering into DJS, that young people of all ages can be referred to those diversionary programs, and we are not even trying that amongst other methods right now. So there are ways to get folks help. I completely agree that we need to do a much better job of doing that. But the way to do that does not require arresting them, and I don't think that that's what we should be looking at. Now, this bullet point does not say necessarily that that's what we're supporting. However, I think that because there is a tremendous amount of public pressure to roll back those reforms, I do think that the phrasing of this bullet point can be read to understand that the Montgomery County Council is supporting a rolling back of those state level reforms, even though it does not say those exact words. I do think that the implication is there, and that folks, including our state partners, may read it as such. I think that we've got a big enough battle ahead of us to make sure that that doesn't happen already. So I'm not at all comfortable with the bullet point as it is currently phrased. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I want to go back to what Councilmember Giwando and Council Vice President Friedson said before about this document and what it should be. And, we just had lunch with representatives from MACO, and we just found out on MACO, they have to keep their legislative priorities to 4. And that's like in their charter. So I'm not taking a position on the language here, and I think the very impassioned conversation we're having among our colleagues is a reason for me why I think we should not include it, and this is a conversation we should have when we have legislation before us to decide as a body whether or not we're going to support. So,
Very well said, Councilmember Stewart. Council Vice President Friedson and I were just talking about this, and because the document needs to be conveyed, needs to be understood, and given that MACO has a self-imposed limit of 4 items, I think it makes most sense that anything that anyone has an objection to should be stricken. And we should not belabor this conversation with endless debate. As important as those debates are, as has been noted by multiple people, we will have time for those specific policy debates when the legislation comes before us. This is not about specific legislation. These are overarching goals of which we should all unanimously be supportive of. So I'd like to make a recommendation that if there is an objection, we strike it without debate. Is there unanimous agreement about that? No. Okay. Councilmember Mink.
I don't want to have long debates about any of about these. However, if there is an objection to striking something, I would appreciate just briefly hearing from, even if I don't agree, I appreciate hearing just briefly from, and maybe they're going to convince me, and now I'm in agreement. So if we could give even just a tiny window, I think it's important to make sure that the public understands why we're striking it and that our colleagues understand. And then if we're not quickly coming to resolution, I understand moving forward, but I just want to make sure we don't stifle all.
So this is a majority rules body. I just want everyone to know that we are still talking about the priorities letter. We still have to talk about specific legislation. So let's self-limit, and so that we can do other things. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you. I actually agree with Councilmember Mink on this one. It might be the first time today, Councilmember Mink, but
2:15 p.m. November 14th.
Historical moment. I believe that if we're going to strike something, and I understand the unanimous part. I mean, we could all play games and say I'm in disagreement with that, and this letter would take about 4 seconds because we wouldn't write it. So if it has to be unanimous. But the point on this being, if someone does disagree, though it should be a quick conversation, I believe the person should go on record and say why they disagree with it.
Councilmember Giwando.
I'm going to agree with Councilmember Katz and Councilmember Mink. And I think that while I agree that generally we should, on this letter, have less and be consensus-based, I do think it's beneficial to the public and to the press and to our staff that are working both here to know where we're coming from and have that in mind when they're going back and talking to folks when the actual bills come. I don't think it makes a ton of sense, and I'm going to hold myself back from answering any specific criticism because there's no bill before us, and I'll save my passion for then. But so I generally agree, but I do agree with Councilmember Mink's point. We should just be able to say generally why we disagree, but in practice, I kind of agree with that it should be removed. So my motion, I think, or request or objection is still on the table here.
Well, so just for the record, what you're suggesting is no different than what I was suggesting. If someone makes a motion to strike something, I would expect them to state a reason as to why, and then with the goal of unanimous consent and streamlining, it should then be stricken. Okay. Vice
Agreed.
President Friedson, hopefully last.
Ditto. No, yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I think the expectation is you could object, explain your objection. The purpose here is not for us then to engage in a period of debate over that. We're honoring the unanimous consent doctrine here and saying, once you have objected, explained your objection, we no longer have unanimous consent, and therefore we're not going to include it in a document that we've decided is going to be unanimous. There could be other people who also object. I don't think everybody then needs to, weigh in. You can find other opportunities to do that. I think that way we arrive at a document that, that is unanimous and that, gets us to a place where we can have a meeting that concludes in a reasonable period of time. So
I agree with President Glass then.
So a motion has been made to strike bullet number 2 in the public safety, and so we will, under unanimous consent, we will agree with that. Very good. Any other items in the priority letter, colleagues? Councilmember Balcom.
So just, whoops. These 1, 2, 3s in the mic always gets me. Just cause eviction. We had a brief discussion about this when we talked about the rent stabilization, but as a body, this council has never taken a position on just cause legislation. And so the prior councils have, this council has not. So I would like to strike this.
Okay, without objection. Anything else, colleagues? Councilmember Jawanda.
Just wanted to mention, and we're doing pretty good on time, by the way, Vice President Friesen. We'll be early.
There is a committee that has to meet after this,
I
too.
understand that. The just cause of, I just wanted to make sure I understand where were you striking that from?
Third bullet under housing.
Oh,
Yeah.
that had been
Yeah.
added. Okay. I think, again, this was a little bit of my concern with the unanimous consent, but again, we'll take this up when it comes before us.
Correct.
And we can vote it.
There are 2 bites on all these apples. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Mink.
Just clarifying on that one. So are we striking the whole bullet or just the just cause part? So
The
support
motion
strategies.
was for the bullet. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Okay, I think we got the priorities letter down to 2 pages. We'll work with you to make sure that the final letter reflects some of the copy edits and removals, but appreciate everyone working this through in real time. As Councilmember Albernaz said, it's somewhat reinventing the wheel every year, but it's important work. So now on to actual legislation, proposed legislation. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Wenger.
Okay, so what you have before you is a summary of each of the bills. We have, in some cases, not quite enough information. We have unanswered questions, so we're going to have a little bit more time because I am assuming that we're just going to discuss these and there will not be a vote on any of these today unless the council president wants to do that, so it's up to him. But we do have still some unanswered issues here, so we'll have a little bit of time to work those out. But what we'll try and do in the time we have left is just to briefly describe each of these pieces of legislation and answer any questions that you have along the way that hopefully we can answer at this point in time. So we're just going to go right through the list, so it's going to be a little kind of back and forth here. And the first bill is something that Kathleen works on the voting methods.
Mr. President, council members, you've seen this before. It's been introduced twice before. It's been supported by the county executive and county council twice before. It's been passed by our delegation twice before, and it always stalls in House Ways and Means. It would give the county enabling authority, and only enabling authority, to decide whether it wanted to implement ranked choice voting or approval voting in the 7 offices that you see there in the packet.
Thank you for that. Something I know that the council has supported for a long time and appreciate as we go through these, speaking about the legislative track record, if it is a brand new bill or something that's been introduced multiple times, I think we're all in support of this and will continue being in support of it, so without objection.
Leslie?
So, well, we're giving our support, right? Do you want to actually vote, colleagues? I defer up to you.
That's fine.
So we are now giving, so what we're doing in this process is we are giving the council's approval to these pieces of legislation. And according to our internal rules and guidelines, Ms. Wenger and her team can only advocate and lobby for legislation if the county executive and the council are both supportive. And so when we both have thumbs up, it gives them the green light. Is that right?
Right, and I should just note too, the
Yeah.
county executive has not seen this package. We're meeting with him on Thursday to get his recommendations about the bill, so.
Great.
Okay. MC 324 does 3 things. This is a Housing Opportunities Commission requested bill, I should say. It removes a required public hearing on any assisted family housing project undertaken by HOC. It removes a required report on the hearing, and it eliminates a required notice of hearing to be published in a newspaper.
Colleagues? Is this is a new piece of legislation, right?
That's correct.
Councilmember Jawanda.
Just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. It was an HOC requested?
They worked with the sponsors, from what I
Yeah,
understand.
to put this forward.
That's right.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what my understanding was. I'm personally fine with it.
Any objection? Councilmember Lutke?
Yeah, I just want to understand, so this removes all public notice requirements?
It removes the ones enumerated in the bill. I don't know if that would be all public notice requirements.
Right, but all that relate to, like HOC typically has to now give notice, allow for a meeting or have a hearing. And so they don't have to do, I mean, the newspaper thing is just such an antiquated, old-fashioned, nobody cares. But I do sort of wonder about removing all notice, or, not communicating, because we have a lot of constituents who write, not about this, but about in general, about feeling like there's not sufficient notice or there's not good communication with the public on particular projects or things of interest. So I would find it interesting that we would wholly eliminate notice of any kind. And I don't know if that's the intent or not.
Vice President Friedson? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to clarify, just in the, my understanding of the bill is that this eliminates the added notices that are required of affordable housing and senior affordable housing that HOC is required to do. The view is making affordable housing and affordable senior housing unnecessarily more burdensome than other types of housing is not appropriate. And so my belief is that HOC and the sponsors were wishing to put it on a level playing field, as we have tried to do with all affordable housing and senior housing. So for that reason, I would be supportive. Unless I'm mistaken, that was my understanding of the impetus behind the bill and what it accomplishes.
Thank you. So with that clarification, any objection to supporting this bill? Not seeing any, so we'll support the bill.
Go ahead.
Mr. President, council members, the next bill deals with vacancies on the Board of Education under current law, and it's a new bill.
New bill.
Mr. President. Under current law, if there's a vacancy on the Board of Ed, the remaining members of the Board of Ed select a member to serve out that term. This bill creates new process for an election. If that vacancy occurs before a certain time period, that time period would be if the vacancy occurs at least 55 days before the primary election in the second year of a member's term. If that does happen, the bill requires that there be an election in that general election that year. So for a district member of the Board of Ed, easy enough then to see what happens. The top vote getter in the general election would serve the remainder of the term. I learned something that was a little bit more complicated for the at-large members. In terms of at-large members, Delegate Plakovich-Carr explained to me, are elected in staggered elections during each congressional election. And so the language in the bill, the way it would work is that the top vote getter in the general election would be the member that serves the full 4-year term coming up. The person who gets the second number of votes in that general election would serve out the term of the member who vacated. So that the bill sets up those procedures, and I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you. What problem are we trying to solve here? Like, what, are they concerned that the appointment of somebody in a vacant position will give them a leg up in the general election? What was the impetus, do we know, for the origins of the bill?
You know, I did talk to the sponsor, Delegate Plakovich-Carr. I didn't ask that. I think maybe because I assumed something, Councilmember Alvarez, which is these issues of trying to find places where vacancies throughout our state and all sorts of offices where vacancies are now being filled by non-elected processes. There are bills in various different offices. They'll be there for state legislators this year. This issue of creating an election process for filling vacancies for elected offices, for the reason you indicated, is certainly a big one. There would be that, and there would just be wanting, whenever you can, to have full electoral involvement in the process. These are the themes that are coming up in the bills that deal with these vacancy issues.
And do you know if Delegate Plakovich-Carr spoke to our Board of Education about her bill? And
I don't. I'll be happy to
whether they provided
ask.
any feedback?
I don't. I'll be happy to ask and get back to you.
I, for one, just am not ready to support or not support. I understand the concern, but as we saw in this last Board of Education cycle, the person who had been appointed actually did not win and was not given a leg up. And so I have a great deal of respect for my colleagues on the Board of Education. I think everybody on this dais has acknowledged that it's ridiculous that they get paid the equivalent of a stipend to do work that's beyond full-time. And so I'd like to hear their perspective on this before I would feel comfortable weighing in on this measure. I think we owe them that respect.
I agree with that. Councilmember Jawando.
Yep, and you beat me to the point. I agree 100%. I think there's several bills in here that I feel that way about, and that we need to get more information either from the sponsors and understand the rationale, and just associate myself with the comments of Councilmember Alvarez. Thank you.
Vice President Friedson.
Yep, associate myself with Councilmember Alvarez as well. Thank you for stating that. Definitely would like some more information on this. I would say, in terms of the problem we're trying to solve, I agree to the point that I think you were starting to make, that I would hope that the focus would more be on providing the tools and the resources so that the Board of Education could provide the type of oversight that we would like, including staffing capacity, salary setting, and other dynamics that I think has limited that and I think needs to improve significantly, and we'd like to be partners in that. I know this body has weighed in on those issues of increasing pay and other related matters specifically for those purposes. So to me, that would be the alarm bell thing to focus on in this arena. I will say on a slightly separate note, I am, have spoken with the Charter Review Commission about the way that executive and council member appointments are filled. And I think there are some opportunities for us to think about that. And I think in general, not related to the Board of Education, the question of how vacancies are filled and the ability of voters, to the extent possible, of making choices as opposed to elected or appointed bodies making choices, is a direction I would like us to move in, because I think it's more democratic. But I think it's a more macro level issue, and I think getting more information specifically related to the Board of Education would be helpful. But I did want to note that for colleagues, because I do think at a high level, in general, I am supportive of, to the extent possible, voters being the ones to make decisions on who represents them, not elected or appointed bodies filling vacancies. So with that, I'll yield back.
Special elections should be encouraged and should be the way we fill vacancies, and I look forward to other legislation that might be introduced in Annapolis that broadens out that goal at other levels, but agree with all my colleagues that we should put a hold on this until we have further conversation.
Sir?
Mr. President and Council, Sarah Morningstar, MC 624 is a reintroduction of a bill from last session whereby bus camera citation revenues for violations that occur on state roads would be required to be sent back, remitted to SHA for then improvements to be made at the locations of where those violations occurred. The council did not take, nor did the executive take a position on the bill last year.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you. I was going to ask, I know I was against it, but I couldn't remember where everyone else was. I think not against the improvements. We always want more money for improvements in pedestrian, particularly near school roadways. But I remember the conversation being, it was such one, our program's working. We're seeing a reduction in people violating, and the recidivism rate for people that go past the bus has gone down. And two, the amount of money, the logistics of figuring out where the money goes, how much would be in the pot, just became something that was not workable. And it took away, obviously we want to have a little more control, but how money is spent within our program. So I thought we had opposed it, but I guess we didn't take a position.
Well, there was procedurally, what ended up happening was it didn't, the bill was rewritten, it was amended.
It got amended.
It got amended, and
happened.
it became then a statewide bill that created a warning for these violations for the first offense.
Got it.
It passed the House, it did not pass in the Senate.
Got it, okay. I remember that now. And
Yeah.
I think in this form, this is the original form that
It kind of died on the vine.
Yeah, so I would suggest that we not support it currently, especially not in this form, but at a minimum, not take a position. Thank you.
So I appreciate Councilmember Jawanda's recall there. I have concerns with this bill because I don't think it addresses some of the underlying issues that I know Delegate Moon has been working on in particular. And it's that people who sometimes get a ticket, particularly in District 20 along Colesville and Georgia Avenue, where there is no median, they are driving 4, 5, or 6 lanes on the opposite side, literally do not see the bus stop, and thereby there's actually no pedestrian infrastructure to improve. It is the law that says whenever there is no median, but you pass, a ticket is given. And I know Delegate Moon has been working to try and change that without any luck. And so my underlying concern is that when those incidents happen, there's no pedestrian improvement to make. And if there was some other way that the money collected, I think it does go towards some pedestrian improvements, but I don't think this is necessarily the right way of doing that. Council Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. I was going to highlight some of those points. I believe we opposed, and then we took no position on the updated statewide bill. We expressed concerns with distributing money at the particular bus stops and whether or not that funding would actually result in an actual project, and what would happen if there was, for instance, a nominal number of citations at a particular area. It doesn't seem to be a fiscally reasonable way to distribute funds, but we were glad to see that the requiring a warning for something that we are very concerned about, the safety of our children in and around schools. I'm somebody who represents a community where we've had death and serious injuries, life-altering, life-changing, traumatic, serious injuries related to school bus incidents. And I know others are in similar boats, and at least one of them is now in Councilmember Stewart's district, for instance, that I used to represent. So this is something that's very near and dear to many of us who have worked a lot on these issues. I would suggest, I mean, I don't even think we should take no position. I would suggest we support the safety piece, we support the pedestrian improvement piece, but generally not support the bill. So, and I think that was generally the approach that we took last year. So I would suggest, rather than holding it and saying that we don't really have a position on this, I think I agree with Councilmember Joanna. We do have a position on this, and I think we should take it.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I'm pretty much in agreement. The other, first of all, I don't believe that you should just spend the money from State Highway near where this happened. I mean, it depends on how many fines you're getting, but it might take an awful long time for them to come up with enough funds to correct what the violation occurred. The other thing is that I think that we had mentioned earlier, it's not in this piece of legislation, but we had mentioned earlier the problem that there's no reciprocity for out-of-state people that are passing air school buses, and it was by the millions of dollars when we had at the joint committee meeting from Public Safety and Education and Culture, that there's no reciprocity that we can collect funds from an out-of-state driver. And I believe that we should try to have some discussions that if somebody's coming through Montgomery County or Maryland and putting our children at risk, they should be fined.
The District of Columbia regularly talks about reciprocity, so if that's a conversation you want to have, we can engage in that discussion. Councilmember Balcom.
I just wanted to highlight what Councilmember Katz said in terms of the functionality of this bill. The small dollar value of the fines just isn't going to do what it's intended to do. And I think I agree with what's been said so far, that we should not support the bill.
Okay. So there seems to be a unanimous agreement that we will oppose this legislation. Is there any objection? Okay.
Sarah? The next bill is MC 724. This bill largely matches the requirements of what the county did with the Safe Streets Act of 2023, where the sponsor is looking to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety in urban areas on state roads by eliminating right turns on red and providing a head start for pedestrians and bicyclists in those areas.
I strongly support it. I'll say, again, appreciate, I believe, all my colleagues who supported the Safe Streets Act, unanimous sponsorship. The shortcoming of it is that it was only, it only pertained to county roads, and we needed our state partners, and I'm glad our state partners are stepping up so that we can have safe streets throughout the county. So without objection, we'll support that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, MC 824 provides that any covenant, restriction, or condition is void and unenforceable if it prohibits the use of real property for housing that is otherwise authorized under law. The sponsor's office has indicated that this bill will be amended to clarify that it should be limited to residential property.
I'm hearing questions from my colleagues, which will probably portend a hold, but let's engage in conversation. Councilmember Lutke.
Thank you. Okay, let me just clarify this, and I'm trying to make it as short as possible. So the intent of this is to say that that nobody can restrict taking existing residential property and saying it cannot be used for residential property moving forward. Is that it? For housing units?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna guess by the quizzical looks on everyone's faces, we should just
Well,
hold.
I'm sorry, could you,
Yeah.
would you restate your statement? I'm trying to make sure I understood it.
It says that there's going to be some amendments because some clarification is needed. So we know we're already starting with a problem where things may not be as clear as possible.
Correct.
But is the goal of this that no one, a landowner who owns real property that is currently residential, would not be able to restrict residential property for being used for housing units? So you couldn't change existing residential property or use of real property, then prohibit it for housing, or does it apply to all? So industrial, commercial?
Well, that, I'm not sure, but I might have misled you in my statement. So how I understand it is that the restriction on use that's drafted in the bill says that you cannot prohibit the use of real property for housing units that would otherwise be authorized. So what I understand that to mean is that if you sell a residential property, there can be no covenant in the deed that says that property can't be demoed and rebuilt as more dense housing, for example.
Right, so this would make it so that people can't restrict doing
that.
upzoning, if you will,
Yes,
right?
correct.
Okay, cool.
That is
That's
my
good.
understanding.
Just want to make clear. Thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Balcom.
Yeah, so I had the same thing of what exactly does this do and what's the purpose of the bill? I think that I would suggest that we wait on this. I think that everybody has questions about what actually it does.
Council Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, my understanding is that this goes beyond what is being discussed here, and there are real questions about the enforceability, because a lot of this has to do with covenants and other things that are contractual, and there are limitations with what can be prevented and not prevented by parties agreeing, and that covenant is an example of that. I think I generally probably agree with the reasons why the sponsors are moving this forward, but I do think there's some real concerns and questions about how this bill would work. I would like to learn a little bit more about it and find out how they're addressing the enforceability issues to make sure that this can actually pass and be utilized, and also what the impact would be on local zoning. For instance, it begs the question on like ADUs, for instance. That would be a very obvious example of what I think is trying to be addressed here, which is to say, in general, the county allows for accessory dwelling units that are not connected to a housing unit, but many covenants prevent that from happening in lots of areas of the county. And would this bill be speaking to that? Is that what it's attempting to address? I think those are the type of questions that would be helpful for us to understand. Similarly, if the county were to make zoning changes, would this make those zoning changes? Would this have state law require that those zoning changes are necessarily also enforceable regardless of covenants or contractual agreements, like for instance in an HOA? So to me, those would be the types of questions that would be helpful for us to get clarification on, so that we can understand, what the impetus behind it is, and exactly what they're focused on.
Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, I remember talking to some of the sponsors about this at some point. My understanding is that is the intent to ADUs, or if we eventually do missing middle or some more sort of attainable housing strategy, that you can't say that can't be done. I actually remember when we passed the ADU bill, there was some discussion that there are places where this can't happen because of certain covenants. So I think this is that, but we should find out. I would be in favor of that change, but we should find out. Thank you.
We are all intrigued. We want to learn more, and we'll hold off until we do.
Right, so right before we came to this meeting, Leslie had asked a lot of questions from our county attorney's office and just got a response, but I didn't even have time to read it, and my guess is Leslie didn't, so could be wise to hold on to this.
It's all good. We'll see you again soon. Next item.
Okay, so this is a piece of legislation we discussed recently. During the pandemic, the state passed a piece of legislation that applied statewide that allowed licensed restaurants and hotels to sell to customers that purchase food there, take out beer, wine, and cocktails. So that piece of legislation expired on June 30th. And so this piece of legislation is local, applies to Montgomery County only, and enables those same licensed restaurants and hotels to sell for off-premise consumption, take out beer and take out wine. Does not include cocktails, and it does not allow delivery, so it does diverge in that area. That's what the piece of legislation does.
Thank you for that debrief. I had requested this legislation. I know the county executive supports it, if not officially yet.
He does.
He does. Okay, so he supports it. Again, it's just trying to bring some common sense back to carry out, and hope my colleagues will indulge without objection. I say what I mean, yes. Thank you. Cheers, indeed. Well played.
All right,
Without objection.
keep going, okay.
Let's keep going.
Sarah?
This is MC 1024. This bill would authorize the county to reduce posted speed limits after performing engineering and traffic study, which we already have the ability to do, but also adding that we need to do an analysis as part of our Complete Streets Design Guide or approving a functional master plan. I have not spoken with the sponsors of this bill, but it seems to just require those additional steps for reducing the speed limits. It also would retain an earlier legislative ban on speed camera enforcement on roads where we have reduced the posted speed limit.
So I know that the sponsors of this legislation, the District 20 team, over the years have tried to support reducing speed limits, which I know has been a noteworthy goal. Various departments of transportation, both I think at the state and county level, have had some concerns with how low can you go and what the efficiency of those roads are. But I do have concerns about the camera prohibition, and so I don't think I can support it on that basis. I think more eyes on the road, be them real or electronic, are good things for pedestrian safety and traffic safety. So I'm inclined to oppose, or at least hold off and see if we can talk to the sponsors about amending that. But I'm open to colleagues' suggestions. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you. I also don't like that continued legislative ban on speed camera enforcement. I think we need to be moving more in that direction, not less. Speed kills. It's the #1 killer. I just want to make sure I understand the first part. So this is saying that municipalities and us can lower posted maximum speed limits but which we can. What's the change here?
The change
is that we have to go
add-
through steps.
Yeah, they
these
add
these hoops.
conducting an analysis.
Because we can
of our
already do
complete
that.
streets. Well, right now we're only required to have engineering and traffic studies.
Right, that's what I'm saying. We already have the authority
We
to
already
lower
have
the
that, yes, but
lower
they
the
would
speed
add
limit.
then that this bill would then add that you would have to do an analysis with Complete Streets Guide and/or improving a
Right,
functional
right.
master
So it's more onerous. Another step. That was how I'm reading it, which is I think we don't want. We want to continue to, just from maintaining our authority. I have high confidence in our DOT and our planning department. They work really, particularly DOT in this instance, really well and are very thoughtful here. So I would think we would oppose this bill holistically. So, yeah.
Second.
Okay. Councilmember Malcolm.
Sorry, I should have withdrawn. Thanks. I agree with the gentleman here.
Right honorable gentleman. Councilmember Mink.
I just want to, I'm hesitant to blanket oppose just because I'm afraid, I'm just nervous that I'm missing something, and because we haven't had the conversation with the team. So I'd rather hold no, because as we've noted that they have been so aligned on this shared goal, and so I would just appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. I apologize for not doing this in advance, but I'd like to have a conversation with them before we oppose, just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding anything. So I guess that's where I would land on that.
I tend to agree with that. Councilmember Balcom.
Yes, so one of the things I was going to mention is that it is more onerous for us to be able to lower speeds, which is against what we spent so much time doing with our pedestrian safety master plan, with our safe streets, and just really focusing on that. And I think that and I don't know this, but my guess is the clause about not being able to put in speed cameras where the lowered maximum speed, my guess is that so they want to make sure that the reason that we're not lowering speeds is to set up a speed trap. And so I just think that line of thinking is not keeping up with the times of pedestrian safety. So,
Well, and if that's the intent, it's worth a conversation, which is why I would prefer to hold and engage in that conversation. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I will just say we just opposed the exact same delegates' bill on school bus cameras because it doesn't align with our priorities here. I have great respect for all three of them. They do a wonderful job. We partner with them on a number of issues. These are a few issues that we, respectfully don't agree on. I will reserve the right to change my opinion on the bill if they choose to change it. But I feel strongly that the number one issue that contributes to fatalities is speed. Period. Full stop. The data is overwhelmingly clear. It's entirely obvious. The 40-mile-per-hour mark is everything. It is a matter of life and death. And one of the tools that we have to address that are speed cameras. So we have two challenges here. One is reducing the speed limit, which is more cumbersome under the provisions of this bill as it is written. And number two, retaining a provision that we adamantly don't like, which is making it harder to employ one of the most proven measures to reduce speed. And I will say, from an automated enforcement standpoint, from an equity perspective, it's one of the most cost-effective and equitable ways to do traffic enforcement. So it is aligned with a number of our goals. So making that harder in our approach to achieve Vision Zero and to bring down the speed on our roads to keep people safe, I would personally say we oppose it. And if there are other changes to it, we can do that. Unless we're missing something and there's, unless we hear from staff. But we're here to take up the bills. We've been voting on everything else. I think we should take position.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I can agree a little faster. I agree that we should take this off. And I also wanted to point out that and I agree with the gentleman from my right, let me say it that way. I also agree that years ago on Watkins Mill Road, the city of Gaithersburg had actually raised the speed limit on that road because we were getting too many speed camera tickets. And we had it re-engineered. We had air engineers go out and look, and that speed went from 25 to 35 because the engineering allowed for that. And people were driving that in a safe way, and we were getting tickets from it.
So I'm hearing a split body about whether to hold or reject this. To reject it. To oppose it. Well, oppose it. Okay. All those in favor of opposing it? All those in favor of holding it? Okay, it's opposed. It is 2:54. There's a very important committee that is to meet this afternoon. I'm going to say that we will stop full council at 3:15. So if we could all just be mindful of our comments, and we'll get through as much as we can.
Okay, okay. So the next bill is, this is, I think, the third time you've seen this piece of legislation, but it's had different renditions each time. The bill before you now would require, would allow the Maryland Transportation Authority to place up to 4 speed cameras on the intercounty connector. And if they do that, they would have to follow exactly the same procedures and processes that are in place in the statute now if a local government did it. So this is the current rendition of this piece of legislation.
Having heard everyone's comments, are there any objections to supporting this legislation? Hearing none, without objection, we'll support.
Okay, the next bill deals with the state's attorney's office and county personnel laws and collective bargaining. From a simplistic level, this bill, I did speak with the sponsor, this bill was intended to impose rules on the state's attorney's office that are similar to current rules on the sheriff's office in terms of employees that have collective bargaining, where in the case of the sheriff's office, the sheriff is the employer for the purposes of all working conditions except compensation and hours, including pension and fringe benefits. In that case, the county executive is was the employer. So it gets pretty complicated after that, but this bill was supposed to reflect that same model. It's very skeletal in the packet. I can just tell you, after learning from the sponsor and learning that that was the intent, I did look at the statutory provisions that apply to the sheriff. They're much more detailed, sort of much more complex in terms of teasing out subtleties and issues that will arise in this kind of model. So it's not the same, and I did share that with the sponsor. He was not sure why there were differences because he had asked the DLS bill drafter to sort of make the model the same. In the packet, you'll also see that the county attorney's office had a number of potential questions about the bill and might need amendments to implement it, or actually might conflict with other state laws or county charter, et cetera. So they need more time. They're working on that, but they need more time to flesh out those issues as well.
So given this is in the early stages of draft development, there are a lot of other questions. Can I recommend we hold to learn more? Great, without objection.
Okay, this next bill is very interesting because it's actually a statewide bill. It's not a local bill. But for the moment, it is proceeding through our local delegation process, and probably for a good reason. I think it'll all be worked out in the end. It's a statewide bill because there's currently a truancy reduction pilot program at the state level. And it's actually, there's authority for certain jurisdictions to implement a truancy reduction pilot program. And those jurisdictions are listed in the packet. The bill changes that from a pilot program to a permanent program, calls it a new name, Truancy Reduction and School Reengagement Program. It adds new language about the purpose of the program, expands the authority, the local enabling authority. And the local enabling authority is actually given to the circuit administrative judge, so the circuit court administrative judge, to develop this kind of program. So it changes the program statewide for any circuit judge, circuit administrative judge that chooses to develop this program, but then it adds in Montgomery County, our 7th Circuit administrative judge, as having that authority too. Again, it's proceeding through the local delegation. In the end, if it passes, it will be essentially treated as a statewide bill, but it seems wise to do what the delegation is doing, which is to get public input on a bill that'll have particular Montgomery County impact in the end.
Great. Councilmember Mink.
I absolutely would like to hear the community input and to follow along with this bill as it develops. I don't think that we should express our support necessarily because there's just a lot of information that we don't have yet. I think that the idea to get information is is the right one. So I hope that we continue to track this one. But, there's a pilot program. We don't have any data out of that. We have a lot of truancy programs at the, at the county level, at the school level, with McCarthy's office. Like, there's a lot of efforts that are going on. We just had a committee meeting about it, and we're working on getting data from that to figure out where we want to direct our resources, what's working the best. And I think that this should be in that pool as well. So for me, I would not like to support this bill yet, but I would like to track it very closely and continue to get updates.
Councilmember, no, Balcom, yes.
Yes, I agree with Councilmember Mink on this. I would be concerned about enforcement and penalty and how that would adversely impact some of our families.
Okay, so I'm hearing a recommendation to hold for more information. So without any objection, hearing none, we will hold.
The next bill is MC 1524. This is a bill that is sort of like a bill that was introduced in 2023 to expand speed camera use on some of our roadways. Last year, the sponsor had it, and there couldn't be agreement that was reached, so he pulled it. It's been reintroduced, authorizing Montgomery County to put speed cameras on roadways identified on roads that have a high injury network. There are other requirements that we would have to direct any speed camera revenues toward funding studies, design, and construction of safety-related projects. And additionally, we would be required every 5 years to evaluate the effectiveness of new cameras within this high-injury network. We worked very closely with Delegate Solomon in coming up with this, and hopefully this might work.
Thank you, Ms. Morningstar. I'm glad they came back with this. I know it was internally a little contentious last year, but this is also part of our law here in Montgomery County, as the Safe Streets Act will require a comprehensive camera plan, and we need the state to give us more latitude to develop that plan. So I fully support this. Not seeing any comments. I believe we all do. So without objection, we'll support.
Thank you.
So the next piece of legislation is a reintroduction of a bill from 2022, which I think predated this particular seating of the council. And what it does, and I have Amy Saman sitting behind me just in case, it allows farm breweries and wineries to sell each other's products for on and off consumption.
Share and share alike? I'm hearing yes, I'm hearing a cheers. So we will support, just based on the good comments I'm hearing from colleagues, we'll support this without objection.
The next bill is MC 1924. It gets rid of the arcane publication notices with regard to the speed camera program. Pretty straightforward about publishing a notice in a newspaper of general circulation in the jurisdiction, which is the Washington Post, for all intents and purposes.
And just to clarify, whenever a speed camera was installed or is installed, it's required to be posted in the newspaper?
Yes.
Fascinating. Councilmember Stewart. Okay. Very, very interesting. I think that makes sense. Without objection, we'll support that.
Thank you.
Okay, this next piece of legislation, I think, was something that was discussed by the Development Review Work Group over the summer that I did not follow, so my information is secondhand, but I think that there are some people here who did follow it closely. There was, I think in 2016, there was a discussion that took place formally with the State Highway Administration, and part of that discussion was, again, trying to expedite the development review process. The State Highway Administration tends to, or has as their stated goal that they will finish their review within 45 days, and that does not align with the development review process in Montgomery County, which is 30 days. So there was some type of agreement that they would work towards doing that. I think the pandemic hit a number of things, and that seemed to have been kind of dropped from the radar. And the development review work group that met over the summer identified this as a continuing issue And so I think the intention of the bill was to write in state law a requirement that the State Highway Administration in Montgomery County only finalize their work product in the same timeline as the development review process for Montgomery County, which is 30 days. However, the bill, I don't believe, I'm hearing does not reflect exactly that conversation, the consensus conversation that happened. So I think conversation needs to happen about amending it to make sure that it does what the discussion was about, and no more and no less.
Thank you for that explanation. First, want to extend my appreciation to Delegate Lopez for convening the development work group. And I know that there was consensus, and if even more than consensus, unanimous support for the various pieces of policy proposals that were developed there to help streamline processes. If this is something that was one of those recommendations, and I would feel comfortable supporting it, because that ultimately was the goal of the work group. I know that we're joined by Ms. Dunn. I'll give her a few seconds. Or if you're ready, can you respond to this as our representative on that work group?
Yes, so in taking a closer look at the actual text of the bill, it seems to apply to highway construction projects. And the work group in their review of it was really about getting a syncing of comments from the State Highway Administration on development applications with MCDOT's timeframe of 30 days. The way the bill is written, it looks like it applies to highway construction projects and not general development applications. So there's something a little off about it. So I think that we should clarify that before if it was intended to further what was recommended by the work group, then it would apply to all development applications in which SHA would be making recommendations or comments.
Thank you for that insight. Vice President Friedson.
Yeah, my guess is this is a drafting error, but I think it would be prudent to have staff and council staff and planning staff speak with the delegates, since they were involved in the work group, just to get clarification on that. There's a difference between a transportation project, which this is addressing, and development review for a private application that involves a state highway, that requires state highway review. The idea here was many of the challenges related to the regulatory review process are not necessarily part of the planning department's review. They're part of state highway review or Department of Transportation review or permitting review or some other area. This was one example of that, an area where the state could address a problem. I think it was a bill drafting question, so that clarification and coming back would make sense. So thanks.
And I see Ms. Stern and Mr. Sartori here as well. And so as some of these recommendations move through, hearing your input would be helpful to make sure that all are in line and in accordance with what you all agreed upon. So let's put a hold on this and get clarification from the sponsor without objection. So at this point, we're done with the local bills, and we now have a list of the bi-county bills. So I'm going to suggest we cut off here because the bi-county bills have a little more time to go, since they have to go through Prince George's County as well. And so we'll pick this up at our next session. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you to the team. Oh, okay. And before we adjourn, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to be noted as in the affirmative for both the consent calendar as well as the bill for final reading, expedited bill 3923.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. And with that, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.